Loretta Davis had cleaned enough mansions to know the rules: stay quiet, keep your head down, and never let your daughter wander into forbidden rooms. But when 12-year-old Zara saw the portrait of a young boy holding a wooden sailboat, her breath caught, because she knew those eyes. They belonged to Eli, the quiet boy from the orphanage who vanished 2 years ago. And when she turned to billionaire Graham Westmore and whispered, "Sir, this boy lived with me in the orphanage," his face went pale, his hands trembled, and everyone knew that something impossible was about to surface, because that boy in the portrait had been dead for 10 years. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Loretta Davis pulled her aging Honda into the service entrance of Westmore Manor. She'd been working here for 6 months now, long enough to know the rules, but not long enough to feel truly comfortable. The mansion loomed before her, all white stone and tall windows, the kind of place that made you feel small just by existing near it. Today was different, though. Zara sat in the passenger seat, her backpack clutched on her lap, eyes wide as she took in the sprawling estate. "Remember what I told you," Loretta said, turning off the engine. "You stay in the staff kitchen. You don't touch anything. You don't wander." "Understood." Zara nodded, her 12-year-old face serious. "Yes, Mama." The school had dismissed early due to a burst pipe, and Loretta had no choice but to bring her daughter to work. She hated doing it, hated the way it made her feel like she was breaking some unspoken rule about keeping her two worlds separate. But what else could she do? Leave Zara home alone in their small apartment? They walked through the service entrance together, Loretta's shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. The kitchen was already bustling with morning activity. The head housekeeper, Ms. Pennington, looked up from her clipboard, her thin lips pressing into a disapproving line. "Mrs. Davis, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing guests to work." "Emergency, ma'am," Loretta said quickly. "School let out early. She'll stay in the kitchen. Won't be any trouble." Ms. Pennington's pale blue eyes swept over Zara, taking in her worn sneakers and patched jacket. "See that she doesn't. Mr. Westmore doesn't appreciate disruptions." "Yes, ma'am." As Ms. Pennington walked away, one of the younger maids, a girl named Sophie, leaned over and whispered to another staff member. Zara caught the words "maid's kid" and felt her cheeks burn. She'd heard worse before. Growing up the way she had, you learned to let certain things roll off your back. But it still stung. Loretta got Zara settled at a small table in the corner with a book and a granola bar. "I'll be back to check on you every hour. You need anything, you ask Marie." She gestured to the kind-faced older cook who gave Zara a warm smile. "I'll be fine, Mama." Loretta squeezed her daughter's shoulder and disappeared into the main house to begin her duties. For the first hour, Zara did exactly as she was told. She read her book, ate her snack, and watched the kitchen staff move around like a well-choreographed dance. But eventually, curiosity got the better of her. She'd always been that way, even back in the orphanage after her father died. Always wanted to see what was behind the next door, always asking questions. She slipped out of the kitchen when Marie's back was turned, following the sound of voices down a long hallway lined with paintings. The mansion was even more incredible on the inside than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky. Thick carpets muffled her footsteps. Everything gleamed like it had never known a speck of dust. Zara passed a group of maids polishing silver in one of the sitting rooms. They stopped talking when they saw her, their eyes following her with that same look Ms. Pennington had given her. Outsider, someone who didn't belong. She kept walking, turning corners, passing through rooms that seemed designed just to hold expensive things. Then she heard Ms. Pennington's sharp voice echoing from somewhere ahead. "I don't care what your excuse is. The East Wing is strictly off limits. No exceptions. Mr. Westmore has made that abundantly clear." Zara appeared around the corner and saw Ms. Pennington lecturing a young maintenance worker. Behind them, a set of double doors stood closed, electronic locks gleaming on either side. Above the doors, a small camera pointed down at the hallway. The East Wing. Zara felt a shiver run down her spine. What could be so important that it needed that much security? She ducked back before Ms. Pennington could spot her and hurried down another corridor. This one was quieter, lined with portraits of stern-looking people in old-fashioned clothes. At the far end, she saw an open doorway and warm light spilling out. She approached slowly, peeking inside. It was a study, a beautiful one, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, and a fireplace that could have fit 3 people inside it. Zara stepped in, drawn by the sheer warmth of the space. It felt lived in, unlike the other rooms she'd passed. There were papers on the desk, a half-drunk cup of coffee, a pair of reading glasses. And on the far wall, above the mantel, hung a portrait. Zara moved toward it as if pulled by invisible strings. The painting showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing a navy suit that looked uncomfortable on his small frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, his expression serious. But it was his eyes that stopped Zara cold. She knew those eyes. The boy held a small wooden sailboat in his hands, painted white and blue, with tiny details that the artist had captured perfectly. Zara's breath caught in her throat. She moved closer, her hand reaching out almost of its own accord. "Eli," she whispered. But that was impossible. The boy in the painting looked too formal, too wealthy. And yet those eyes, that slight tilt to his head when he was thinking hard about something. The way his fingers curled around the boat, protective and gentle at the same time. Zara had lived in the children's home for nearly a year after her father died, before her mother got back on her feet enough to bring her home. There had been a boy there, quiet and brilliant, who spent all his time drawing pictures of boats. The other kids called him Eli because he never told them his real name. He'd arrive at the orphanage late at night and leave just as mysteriously a few weeks later. Zara had been one of the few kids he actually talked to. They developed their own way of communicating, tapping patterns on the walls between their rooms when the lights went out. She'd taught him to play checkers. He'd shown her how to fold paper into intricate ships. But Eli had been scared, always looking over his shoulder, having nightmares about cold water and dark places. And his eyes had held the same deep sadness as the boy in this portrait. Her fingers touched the frame, and she felt her heart hammering in her chest. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was like thunder. Zara spun around, her hand dropping from the portrait. A man stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than her mother made in a year. His hair was graying at the temples, his face lined with the kind of stress that came from carrying heavy burdens. Graham Westmore. She'd seen his picture in the staff break room, though the photo didn't capture how intense his presence was in person. How his eyes seemed to look right through you. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. How did you get in here?" His voice was cold, controlled. "Where's your mother?" "She's working, sir. I'm Zara Davis. I didn't touch anything. I was just what? Exploring where you don't belong." He moved into the room, and Zara noticed how his gaze flickered to the portrait, how something pained crossed his face before he locked it away. Zara's fear dissolved into something else. Something that came from deep in her gut, the same instinct that had made her stand up to bullies in the orphanage, that made her speak up when something wasn't right. She turned back to the portrait, pointing at it with a trembling hand. "Sir, this boy lived with me in the orphanage." The silence that followed was absolute. Zara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the distant sound of someone vacuuming in another part of the house. She turned to look at Graham Westmore and watched as all the color drained from his face. His hand reached out, gripping the edge of his desk. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "That's not possible. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm telling you the truth," Zara said, her words tumbling out faster now. 2 years ago, at Riverside Children's Home. His name was Eli, at least that's what we called him. He was quiet, really smart. He loved boats. He drew them all the time, and he had this toy one just like she pointed at the sailboat in the portrait, just like that. Graham's legs seemed to give out. He sank into his desk chair, his hands still gripping the wood, so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is my son, Nathaniel Westmore. He died 10 years ago. But, sir, he died." Graham's voice cracked on the word. "There was an accident. A booting accident. He was 8 years old. They found pieces of the boat, but..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Zara felt her own eyes burning with tears. I'm not lying. I wouldn't lie about something like this. The boy I knew, Eli, he was maybe 9 or 10 when I met him. He had nightmares about drowning. He used to wake up screaming about cold water and someone holding him under. The staff had to calm him down almost every night. Graham's head snapped up. What? He was scared all the time, but he never said why. He just kept telling me that someone promised to find him, that his father was coming. Zara's voice dropped to a whisper. I remember because it made me sad. My father was dead. I knew he wasn't coming back, but Eli believed his was still out there. The door burst open and Loretta rushed in. Her face panicked. Zara, oh my God. I'm so sorry, Mr. Westmore. She was supposed to stay in the kitchen. I don't know how. Mrs. Davis. Graham held up a hand, cutting her off. His voice was different now, hollow. Take your daughter. Please. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Loretta grabbed Zara's arm, pulling her toward the door. I'm so sorry. This won't happen again. As they hurried out, Zara heard Graham's voice behind them, so quiet she almost missed it. He wasn't talking to them. He was talking to the portrait. Then who was buried in your place? The question followed Zara down the hallway, through the kitchen where staff members stared, all the way out to the car. Her mother was silent during the drive, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the steering wheel. But Zara couldn't stop thinking about the boy in the portrait, about Eli with his sad eyes and his paper boats, about the impossibility of what she just said and the look on Graham Westmore's face when he heard it. Something massive was unfolding, something that had been buried for 10 years, and she just pulled it into the light. 3 days had passed since Zara stood in Graham Westmore's study and spoke words that should have been impossible. 3 days since she'd seen a billionaire's composed mass crack like thin ice over deep water. Her mother hadn't taken her back to the mansion since that day, finding other arrangements when she needed to work. But the silence from Westmore Manor was somehow louder than any response could have been. Loretta moved through their small apartment that evening, cleaning up after dinner with mechanical precision. She'd barely spoken to Zara beyond the necessary words. Her daughter sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out in front of her, but her pencil hadn't moved in 15 minutes. Mama, Zara finally said, are you going to lose your job? Loretta's hands stilled in the soapy water. I don't know, baby. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have wandered off. I shouldn't have said anything. No. Loretta turned, drying her hands on a dish towel. She sat down across from Zara, her expression softer now. You told the truth. You don't apologize for that. Ever. But the boy in the painting. Tell me again, Loretta interrupted. Everything you remember about Eli. Don't leave anything out. So Zara did. She described the orphanage, the cramped rooms, and thin blankets. She talked about how Eli arrived in the middle of the night about 2 years ago, brought by people who never explained where he came from. How he'd stay for a few weeks, then disappear, then show up again months later. How he drew constantly, always the same subject. Boats on water, harbors, ships with billowing sails. He had this toy, Zara said, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. A wooden sailboat, small enough to fit in his pocket. He carried it everywhere. The paint was chipped and faded, but he treated it like treasure. Loretta's breath caught. What color was the paint? White and blue, with a little red stripe along the bottom. Lord have mercy, Loretta whispered. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That's exactly what was in the portrait. The same boat. You saw it. I dust that study every week, Zara. I've looked at that painting 100 times. That little boy with those sad eyes, holding that boat like it was the only thing keeping him from drowning. Loretta pressed her fingers to her temples. And you're telling me you knew him. You live with him. I'm not making it up. I know you're not. Loretta turned back to her daughter. That's what scares me. The next morning, Loretta returned to work alone. The moment she walked into the staff kitchen, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Conversation stopped. People found sudden interest in their coffee cups or their cleaning supplies. Ms. Pennington appeared in the doorway, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Mrs. Davis. A word. Loretta followed the head housekeeper into a small office off the main hall. Ms. Pennington closed the door with deliberate care before turning to face her. I want to be clear about something, Ms. Pennington said, her voice low and tight. Mr. Westmore has been through unimaginable tragedy. He lost his son a decade ago. He spent years learning to live with that loss. What your daughter did the other day, bringing up wild stories and impossible claims, was cruel and inappropriate. My daughter told the truth about what she experienced. Did she? Miss Pennington's eyes were hard. Or did a child see a sad portrait and let her imagination run wild? Perhaps she thought she might get attention or sympathy by claiming some connection to the Westmore family. Anger flared hot in Loretta's chest. My daughter is not a liar. Then she's confused. Either way, I strongly suggest you keep her away from here and keep her mouth shut about this entire incident. Mr. Westmore fought very hard to move forward with his life. This household will not be disrupted by unfounded claims from a child who should never have been wandering through private rooms in the first place. There was something in Miss Pennington's tone that made Loretta's instincts prickle. The words were too prepared, too rehearsed. Like she'd been expecting this conversation. Like she'd been ready for it. Is that all? Loretta asked quietly. That's all. You may return to your duties. Loretta spent the morning cleaning guest rooms on the second floor, her mind churning. She'd worked in enough wealthy homes to know how they operated, how secrets were kept, how inconvenient truths were swept under expensive rugs. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. She was changing linens in the blue room when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb hit the accept button. Mrs. Davis? The voice was male, formal, unfamiliar. Yes. This is Robert, Mr. Westmore's personal assistant. Mr. Westmore would like to speak with you in his study at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Please be prompt. The line went dead before she could respond. At precisely 2 o'clock, Loretta knocked on the study door. The same study where Zara had stood 3 days ago and changed everything. Come in. Graham Westmore sat behind his desk, but he looked different than he had that day. Smaller somehow. Tired. There were papers spread across the desk surface, old photographs, documents with official-looking seals. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. Sit down, please, he said. Loretta sat, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She'd learned long ago not to show fear in front of powerful men. Graham picked up a photograph from his desk and slid it across to her. It showed a young boy, maybe 7 years old, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. He wore swim trunks and held a boogie board, sand dusting his bare feet. That's Nathaniel, Graham said. Nate. We called him Nate. This was taken 6 months before he died. Loretta looked at the photo and felt her heart clench. It was the same face as the boy in the portrait. The same face Zara had described. I need you to tell me everything your daughter told you, Graham continued. Every detail she remembers about this boy called Eli. I need to know if she's absolutely certain about what she saw. Mr. Westmore, please. His voice broke on the word. Please, I need to know. So Loretta told him. She repeated everything Zara had shared, watching as Graham's face went through a dozen different emotions. Horror, hope, disbelief, desperate yearning. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out more photographs. Does she remember anything else? Any other details about his appearance? She mentioned he had a scar, a small one, above his right eyebrow. Graham's hand trembled as he slid another photo across the desk. A close-up of young Nate, and there, clearly visible, was a thin scar cutting through his eyebrow. He got that when he was 4, Graham said quietly. Fell off his bike. Needed 3 stitches. Mr. Westmore, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that my son's body was never found. I'm thinking that the casket we buried was empty except for a few items they recovered from the boat wreckage. I'm thinking that for 10 years, I believed what I was told because I had no reason not to. He looked up at her, and his eyes were burning with something fierce and terrifying. I'm thinking that your daughter just told me my son might still be alive. The words hung in the air between them, too enormous to fully comprehend. The boy at the orphanage, Loretta, said slowly. Zara said he used to say something. She remembered it because it made her sad. What did he say? He said his father was coming, that his father promised to find him. Graham's breath hitched. His hand went to his chest, pressing hard against his heart. For a moment, Loretta thought he might collapse. Then he reached for his phone with shaking hands. "I need to make a call," he said. "Please don't leave. I'll need to speak with you again. And your daughter, is she home right now?" "Yes, sir. With a neighbor. Could you bring her here? I need to ask her some questions myself. I need to see—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Loretta understood. He needed to look in her eyes and see if she was telling the truth. He needed to hear it directly from the child who might hold the key to the impossible. "I'll bring her," Loretta said quietly. "But Mr. Westmore, if she's wrong, if this is all just a terrible coincidence, then I'll be exactly where I've been for the last 10 years, he said. "But if she's right—" He didn't finish that sentence either. He didn't need to. By the time Loretta returned with Zara, the study had filled with new energy. A man in his 50s sat in one of the leather chairs, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his suit expensive but understated. He stood when they entered, extending his hand to Loretta. "Martin Cole," he said. "I'm a private investigator. I worked Mr. Westmore's case 10 years ago." Zara stayed close to her mother's side, her eyes darting between the men. Graham gestured to the sofa. "Please sit. Zara, I want to ask you some questions about the boy you knew. Is that all right?" Zara nodded, her voice small. "Yes, sir." For the next hour, Graham and Martin questioned her gently but thoroughly. They showed her photographs of Nate, and Zara identified the same smile, the same way he tilted his head when concentrating. They showed her drawings Nate had made as a young child, all featuring boats and water, and Zara nodded vigorously. Eli drew exactly like that. The same way. He always put little flags on the masts, and he always drew birds in the sky. "Did he ever talk about his family?" Martin asked, taking notes on a small pad. "Not really. He was scared to." Zara bit her lip. "Once, I asked him why he was at the orphanage if his father was coming for him. He just said that someone told him his father didn't want him anymore. But he didn't believe it. He said he knew it wasn't true." Graham made a sound like he'd been punched. He stood abruptly, walking to the window, his back to them. His shoulders shook. Martin cleared his throat gently. "Zara, do you remember how Eli left the orphanage the last time you saw him?" "It was late at night. I heard people talking in the hallway. When I looked out, I saw him being led away by a woman in a gray uniform, like a nurse or something. He was crying and holding his boat. He looked back at me and said—" She paused, remembering. "He said, 'Please don't send me back there.' Then they were gone. I never saw him again." "What did the woman look like?" Martin leaned forward. "Any details you remember?" "She was tall. She had dark hair pulled back tight, and she had a mark on her face like a scar or a birthmark. Right here." Zara touched her jaw, near her ear. Graham turned from the window, so fast he nearly knocked over a lamp. "What did you say?" "A mark. On her jaw." "Mr. Westmore?" Martin's voice was sharp. "What is it?" "There was a woman," Graham said slowly, his face going pale. "At the marina the day Nate disappeared. She was one of the seasonal staff. I remember her because she was new, and she kept hanging around the boat. She had—" He touched his own jaw. "She had a port wine birthmark. Right there. Do you remember her name?" "No. She left the next day. Never came back. I thought nothing of it at the time because I was—" He couldn't continue, because he was dealing with the death of his son, or what he believed was the death of his son. Martin stood, his expression grim. "I need to access my old case files. There should be employee records from the marina. If we can identify this woman—" "Do it," Graham said. "Do whatever you need to do. I don't care what it costs." Martin left immediately, promising to call as soon as he found anything. Loretta and Zara remained, watching as Graham sank back into his chair, looking like a man who'd just been told the world might not be round after all. "Thank you," he said finally, looking at Zara. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up, for telling the truth even though no one wanted to hear it." "I just want Eli to be okay," Zara said softly. "He was my friend. He was always so sad. I want him to be home." Graham's eyes filled with tears. "So do I." 2 days later, Martin Cole returned to Westmore Manor with a look on his face that made Graham's blood run cold. "The files are gone," Martin said without preamble. "Every single document related to Nate's case. The physical files were removed from my storage facility. The digital backups have been deleted. Someone wiped them from my system. That's impossible. It should be. I have multiple redundancies, encrypted cloud storage, physical locks. Martin spread his hands helplessly. Someone wanted those files gone badly enough to orchestrate a sophisticated operation to make it happen. Then someone, Graham said slowly, never wanted the truth about my son's disappearance to be found. The two men looked at each other, and the same terrible thought passed between them. This wasn't an accident. This was a cover-up, and it had been ongoing for 10 years. I still have contacts, Martin said. People who might remember details, even if the records are gone. I'll reach out. But Graham, you need to understand what this means. If someone went to this much trouble to bury the truth, they're not going to be happy that it's being dug up now. I don't care. Find out everything you can. Follow every lead. After Martin left, Graham sat alone in his study, staring at the portrait of his son. His mind kept returning to what Zara had said. The woman in the gray uniform. The birthmark on her jaw. The words that haunted him most. Please don't send me back there. Back where? Where had his son been? Who had taken him? And why they made Graham believe he was dead? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in 12 years. Eleanor Westmore, his sister. They'd had a falling out before Nate's death, a bitter fight about inheritance and family legacy. She'd cut ties, moved away, and never even attended Nate's funeral. He'd always resented her for that. But now, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in his mind. Eleanor had worked with a lot of private staff. She'd had access to his schedule, his properties, his life. And she'd hated him for inheriting the Westmore fortune when their father died. Hated him enough to destroy him? He couldn't bring himself to press call. Not yet. Not until he had more proof. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing roots that reached down into the darkest corners of his memory. Someone had taken his son. Someone had hidden him for years. Someone had made Graham believe his child was dead, while keeping him alive and terrified in orphanages and unknown places. And Graham Westmore was going to find out who, even if the truth destroyed everything he thought he knew about his family. Graham Westmore made his decision at 3 a.m, sitting in his study with a tumbler of scotch he hadn't touched. The portrait of Nate watched him from above the fireplace, those painted eyes seeming to ask the question that had been burning in Graham's mind for days now. What are you waiting for? By sunrise, he was dressed and making phone calls. By 8 o'clock, he was standing in Loretta Davis's modest apartment building, knocking on her door with an intensity that made her jump when she opened it. Mr. Westmore? What are you? We're going to the orphanage, he said without preamble. Today. Now. I need you and Zara to come with me. Loretta stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, her hair still wrapped in a sleeping scarf, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Sir, it's 8 a.m. Zara has school, and I have to be at work by 9. I'll call the school, and you're already looking at your employer. His voice softened slightly. Please, Mrs. Davis, I need to know if what your daughter remembers is real. I need to see this place for myself. Something in his face must have convinced her because she stepped back and led him into the small living room. Zara appeared in the hallway, still in her pajamas, her eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Westmore, get dressed, Zara, Loretta said quietly. We're taking a trip. An hour later, they were in Graham's black Mercedes, driving through the city toward Riverside Children's Home. Martin Cole sat in the front passenger seat, a leather folder full of questions balanced on his lap. Zara sat between her mother and Graham in the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I haven't been back there since Mama got me out, Zara said softly. I didn't think I ever would. Graham looked at her. Was it bad? Not bad exactly. Just lonely. Everyone there was waiting for someone to want them. Some kids got adopted. Some aged out. Some, like Eli, just disappeared. She looked up at Graham. I used to wonder where he went. If he was okay. You're very brave, Graham said. To go back there. To help me like this. Eli was my friend. I want to help him. The words hit Graham like a fist to the chest. His son had had a friend. During all those years when Graham thought he was dead, Nate had been alive, making friends, surviving. The thought was both a miracle and an agony. Riverside Children's Home sat on the edge of the city, a 3-story brick building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the lawn needed mowing, and a general air of neglect hung over the place like a fog. As they pulled up, Graham felt his stomach turn. His son had lived here, had slept in one of those rooms behind those dirty windows. A woman met them at the door, her smile professional but strained. "Mr. Westmore? I'm Director Patricia Hoffman. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice." "Of course. Though I must say, I'm not sure how much help I can be. You mentioned you were looking for records of a specific child." She led them through a shabby entry hall toward an office that smelled of old coffee and copy paper. "His name might have been Eli," Graham said. "He would have been here approximately 2 years ago, maybe 9 or 10 years old." Director Hoffman settled behind her desk and pulled up something on her computer. Her fingers clicked across the keyboard while the rest of them waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Westmore. We have no records of any child named Eli during that time period. In fact, we had very few boys that age at all in that window." "That's impossible," Zara said, her voice rising. "He was here. I lived with him." "I'm sure you remember someone, dear," Director Hoffman said with patronizing gentleness. "But sometimes children's memories can be unreliable. Perhaps it was a different facility or a different time period." Loretta's hand settled on Zara's shoulder, a warning to stay calm. But Graham saw his own frustration reflected in the girl's face. This woman was lying. Or at least, she wasn't telling them everything. "May we look around?" Graham asked. Perhaps Zara could show us where she stayed. It might help jog some memories. Director Hoffman hesitated just long enough to be suspicious. "I suppose that would be all right. Though many of our children are in lessons right now, and we do prefer not to disrupt." "We won't disrupt anything," Martin interjected smoothly. "We'll be quick and quiet." They followed the director up a narrow staircase to the second floor, where a long hallway stretched out with doors on either side. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige, and the floors were covered in worn linoleum that squeaked under their shoes. Zara walked ahead, her steps becoming more confident as memory guided her. She stopped in front of a door near the end of the hall. "This was my room, and Eli was." She moved to the next door. "Right here. That's currently empty," Director Hoffman said quickly. "We're between residents in that space." "Can we see it?" Graham asked. It wasn't really a question. The director unlocked the door with a key from the ring at her belt. The room was small and sparse, containing a single bed with a thin mattress, a small dresser, and a narrow window that looked out over a parking lot. The walls were bare except for a few nail holes where posters might have hung. Zara walked straight to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer. She pushed aside some spare blankets and reached into the very back corner. When she pulled her hand out, she was holding something small and wooden. A toy sailboat. The paint was chipped and faded, white and blue with a small red stripe along the bottom. Graham's knees nearly gave out. He reached for the wall to steady himself, his breath coming in short gasps. Martin moved to his side immediately, gripping his elbow. "That's Nate's boat," Graham whispered. "I made that for him when he was 5. He insisted on taking it everywhere. It was in the wreckage after the accident, or so they told me." He looked at Director Hoffman, and his voice went cold. "How do you explain this?" I have no idea how that got there. Anyone could have left. Anyone didn't leave it," Zara interrupted. "Eli hid it there because the other kids used to try to take his things. He showed me this exact spot. He said it was his treasure." Director Hoffman's face had gone pale. "Mr. Westmore, I assure you." "Don't." Graham's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't lie to me again. This boat proves my son was here. So either your records are wrong, or someone deliberately erased them. Which is it?" Before the director could answer, a teenage boy appeared in the doorway. He was thin and nervous looking, maybe 16, wearing a volunteer badge on his shirt. His eyes darted between the adults before settling on Zara. "I remember you," he said quietly. "You're Zara, right? You left about 2 years ago." "That's right," Zara said. "Do you remember Eli?" The boy nodded. "The quiet kid who drew boats all the time." "Yeah, I remember. He was here a few times. They'd bring him late at night, keep him for a few weeks, then he'd disappear again." He looked at Director Hoffman nervously. "I always thought it was weird." "That's enough, Thomas," The director said sharply. You should return to your duties. But Thomas pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Before I do, someone asked me to give this to the girl if she came back. He handed it to Zara. Another volunteer, she left a few months ago, said if anyone ever came asking about Eli, they should know about the night van. Thomas. Director Hoffman stood abruptly. That is completely inappropriate. What night van? Graham demanded. Thomas backed toward the door, clearly regretting his decision to speak up. I don't know all the details, but there was this program, moving kids between facilities late at night. It wasn't official or anything. At least, I never saw paperwork. And Eli was one of the kids who got moved. A lot. He disappeared down the hallway before anyone could ask more questions. Director Hoffman's face had gone from pale to red. Mr. Westmore, if you're going to make accusations, I'll need to ask you to leave and return with proper legal authorization. Fine, Graham said, but I'm not leaving this building until I see every room in it. You can't just. I can and I will. Or would you prefer I call the police right now and report that you're obstructing an investigation into child trafficking? The words hung in the air like a grenade. Director Hoffman opened her mouth, closed it, then sat down heavily in her chair. There's a storage room in the basement, she said finally. Some old records, things we were supposed to digitize but never got around to. You can look there if you insist. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from an underfunded children's home. Concrete floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and the musty smell of mildew. They followed the director to a locked door at the far end, near the boiler room. I haven't been in here in months, she said, fumbling with the keys. I honestly don't know what you'll find. The door swung open, and Graham reached for the light switch. What he saw made his heart stop. The room was full of boxes, filing cabinets, and plastic storage bins. But more than that, there were items. Personal items. Toys scattered on shelves, clothing hanging from a rack in the corner, small shoes lined up against the wall. And covering every available surface were drawings. Hundreds of drawings. Thousands, maybe. Most of them showed the same subject. Boats on water, harbors, ships with billowing sails. Zara gasped. These are Eli's. He drew all of these. Martin immediately began opening boxes, pulling out files. Loretta helped, her hands moving quickly through papers. Graham walked to the wall where the drawings were pinned and taped, his fingers trembling as he touched one after another. They were good, really good, detailed and careful, the work of a child with real talent. And in the corner of each one, a small signature, a simple N inside a circle. N for Nathaniel. Graham, Martin called from across the room. He was holding up a manila folder, his face grim. You need to see this. Inside the folder were transportation logs, dates, times, locations, and signatures. Graham's eyes scanned down the page until they caught on a name he recognized. The signature matched the woman from the marina, the one with the birthmark on her jaw. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the name at the top of the authorization form, the person who had approved these transfers. Eleanor Westmore, his sister. Graham's vision blurred. He grabbed the edge of a filing cabinet to keep from falling. All these years, his own sister had known, had orchestrated it, had kept his son hidden while Graham buried an empty casket and tried to learn how to breathe again. Mr. Westmore? Loretta's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? No, he said simply. I'm not. Zara appeared at his side, holding something else she'd found. It was a small canvas, maybe 8 inches square, showing a painted scene. A mansion with tall windows, a garden with a fountain, and in the foreground, a man's silhouette. Eli painted this, Zara said softly. Look at the bottom. Graham took the canvas with shaking hands. There, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "He still loves me. He'll find me." This time, Graham did fall. He sank to the concrete floor, the painting clutched to his chest, and finally let himself sob. For the years he'd lost, for the suffering his son had endured, for the betrayal that cut deeper than any grief. Loretta knelt beside him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. What could she say? Some pain was too big for words. It was Martin who eventually pulled them up, who got them organized, who started photographing evidence and making calls. They loaded boxes into the Mercedes, ignoring Director Hoffman's weak protests. They took the drawings, the files, the painting, everything that proved Nate had been here. As they drove away from Riverside Children's Home, Graham made another call, this one to his lawyer. I want to own that building by the end of the week, he said coldly. Every brick, every file, every inch of property. And then I want everyone who worked there during the last 3 years investigated. Someone there knew what was happening to my son, and they're going to answer for it. In the back seat, Zara leaned against her mother and watched the building disappear behind them. She thought about Eli hiding his boat in that drawer, drawing his pictures in the dark, waiting for a father who didn't know he was alive. And she thought about how much danger they might all be in now that they'd found the truth. Back at the orphanage, Director Hoffman sat alone in her office, staring at her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed a number she'd hoped never to call again. It rang 3 times before a woman answered. Westmore knows, the director said without preamble. He came here with the girl. They found the storage room. They found everything. There was a long pause on the other end. Then a voice, cold and measured. Then we need to act. Tonight. The line went dead. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night, while Loretta was working late at the manor and Zara was supposed to be at their neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment doing homework. Except Loretta came home to find their door ajar, the lock jimmied, and Mrs. Chen waiting in the hallway with her phone in her hand. I heard the noise and called 911, Mrs. Chen said, her elderly face creased with worry. But whoever it was, they were gone by the time I got brave enough to look. Zara's fine. She's been with me the whole time. But Loretta, I think you should see what they did. Or rather, what they didn't do. The apartment was untouched. The old TV still sat on its stand. Loretta's jewelry box, cheap but precious to her, remained on her dresser. Even the $20 she kept in the kitchen drawer for emergencies was still there. The only thing missing was a photo album. My baby book, Zara whispered, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. The one with all my pictures from the orphanage. Loretta felt ice crystallize in her veins. Someone had broken into their home, not to steal money or electronics, but to take evidence. Evidence of Zara's time at Riverside. Evidence of her connection to Eli. She called Graham immediately. He arrived within 30 minutes, Martin Cole right behind him. Both men surveyed the apartment with grim expressions while 2 police officers took statements and dusted for prints they probably wouldn't find. Pack bag for both of you, Graham said quietly to Loretta. Enough for a week. You're not staying here tonight. Mr. Westmore, I appreciate the concern, but we can't just. Someone broke into your home to destroy evidence of Zara's connection to my son. That means they know she's a threat to whatever they're trying to hide. Graham's voice was steady but firm. I have guest suites at the manor with security systems, cameras, and guards. You'll be safe there. Loretta wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, her pride. But she looked at Zara, who was clutching her remaining stuffed bear and trying not to cry, and she knew Graham was right. Just for a few days, she said, until we know it's safe. As long as you need. They arrived at Westmore Manor after dark, and Graham personally escorted them to a suite in the West Wing. It was bigger than their entire apartment, with 2 bedrooms connected by a shared sitting room. The windows had electronic locks, and a security camera monitored the hallway outside. There's a panic button by each bed, Graham explained, pointing to red buttons on the nightstands. Press it, and security will be here in under a minute. The door locks from the inside, and only my personal code can override it. You'll be safe here. After he left, Loretta and Zara unpacked in silence. The opulence of the rooms felt wrong somehow, like they were playing dress-up in someone else's life. But when Zara crawled into the massive bed, she finally let herself cry. Im scudded, Mama. Loretta held her daughter tight. I know, baby, but we're going to be okay. Mr. Westmore won't let anything happen to us. She hoped that was true. She hoped Graham Westmore's money and power were enough to protect them from whoever had taken his son and kept him hidden for a decade. But in her heart, she knew that people desperate enough to fake a child's death were desperate enough to do anything. The next day, Loretta tried to return her normal duties, but nothing felt normal. The other staff members whispered when she passed. Miss Pennington avoided her entirely, and everywhere she went, she felt eyes watching her. In the afternoon, while dusting the library, she overheard two maids talking in the next room. They're staying here now, in the guest wing. Can you believe it? The whole thing is bizarre. Dredging up the past like this, making poor Mr. Westmore relive all that pain. I heard they found things at that orphanage. Documents or something. Well, I say she should mind her own business. It's not right, a maid getting ideas above her station. Loretta set down her dust cloth and walked into the room. Both maids jumped, their faces flushing. My station, Loretta said quietly, is exactly where it needs to be. And if you have something to say about me or my daughter, you can say it to my face instead of gossiping like school children. They scattered without another word. That evening, after Zara had finished her homework, the girl couldn't sleep. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mansion settling around her. Her mother had already fallen asleep in the next room, exhausted from the stress of the last few days. Around midnight, Zara heard something, a soft sound barely audible, like someone tapping on wood. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound came again. 3 slow taps, then 2 quick ones, then 3 slow again. It was their code, the pattern she and Eli had used to communicate through the orphanage walls. Zara slipped out of bed and pressed her ear to the wall. The tapping came from somewhere inside the mansion, somewhere close. She followed the sound to the far wall of her room, the one that bordered the hallway. But when she stepped into the hallway, it was empty and silent. She stood there in her pajamas, her feet cold on the marble floor, wondering if she'd imagined it. Then she saw it, a seam in the wallpaper barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. She pressed her fingers against it, and a section of the wall shifted slightly. A hidden panel. Before she could investigate further, a hand clamped over her mouth. Zara's scream was muffled as someone dragged her backward. She kicked and fought, her bare feet scraping against the floor, her hands clawing at the arm around her chest. "Stop fighting," a voice hissed. "I'm trying to help you." The hand released her mouth, and Zara spun around to find a young woman in a maid's uniform. She had dark hair pulled back in a bun and frightened eyes. "Who are you?" Zara demanded, her voice shaking. "My name is Karina, and you need to get back to your room right now. These walls aren't safe." "What do you mean? What's behind that panel?" "Old servant corridors. They run through the whole mansion. Most of them haven't been used in decades, but..." Karina glanced nervously down the hallway. "But someone's been using them recently, and you don't want to be out here when they do." "Who? Who's been using them?" "I don't know. I just know that strange things have been happening since you and your mother arrived. Doors opening that should be locked, security footage getting erased, and sounds in the walls at night." Karina pulled Zara toward her room. "Please just stay inside. Keep your door locked. Don't trust anyone." "Do you know something about Eli? About what happened to Mr. Westmore's son?" Karina's face went white. "I don't know anything, and neither should you, if you want to stay safe." She disappeared down the hallway before Zara could ask anything else. Zara returned to her room, but didn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the mansion. And once, around 3 in the morning, she heard again. The tapping pattern, slower this time, sad and desperate. Someone was in the walls. Someone who knew their code. Someone who might be trying to reach her. The next morning, Graham met with Martin in his study. The investigator spread papers across the desk, his expression grave. "I found her," Martin said. "Eleanor. She owns a private estate about 2 hours from here. It's listed under a shell corporation, but I traced it back to her. The place is a fortress. High walls, security gates, surveillance cameras everywhere." "Is Nate there?" "I don't know. But Graham, there's more." Martin slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a woman in her 40s, elegant and cold-eyed. "This is Eleanor now. And look at who's working for her." The next photo showed the same woman from the marina, the one with the birthmark on her jaw. She was leaving Eleanor's estate, carrying a briefcase. "She's still in Eleanor's employ," Martin continued, "which means Eleanor has been actively involved in hiding Nate this entire time. And if she's desperate enough to break into the Davis apartment, she's desperate enough to do worse." Graham's hands clenched into fists. I want surveillance on that estate. Every entrance, every vehicle that comes and goes. I want to know what she's doing. Already on it. But Graham, we need to be careful. If Eleanor knows we're coming. A crash from somewhere in the house interrupted him. Then a scream. Both men ran toward the sound, which had come from the direction of the guest wing. They found Loretta standing in the hallway outside Zara's room, her hand over her mouth, staring at something on the floor. It was a note slipped under Zara's door. In neat handwriting, it read, "You were not supposed to remember him. Keep quiet for your own safety. A friend." Zara stood behind her mother, her face pale. "It was there when I woke up this morning." Graham picked up the note with careful fingers, his jaw tight. Someone in this house is working for Eleanor. Someone who has access to the guest wing. He looked at Martin. "Change all the security codes. Run background checks on every staff member hired in the last year. I want to know who's betraying me." "Sir," Zara said quietly, "there's something else." She told them about the hidden panel, about Karina's warning, about the tapping sounds in the night. With each word, Graham's expression darkened. "Show me," he said. They returned to the hallway, where Zara had found the panel. In the daylight, the seam was even less visible, but Graham pressed against it and felt it give slightly. He called security, and together they pried the panel open. Behind it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Martin pulled out a flashlight and led the way down. The stairs opened into a dusty corridor that smelled of mold and stale air. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and their footsteps echoed in the confined space. But someone had been here recently. They found footprints in the dust, disturbed cobwebs, and then, in a small alcove, something that made Graham's breath catch. A makeshift living space. A cot with a thin blanket. Food wrappers, empty water bottles. Children's drawings tacked to the walls with tape. And sitting on the cot, nearly hidden under the blanket, was a small carved wooden boat. "Dear God," Graham whispered, "someone's been living in my walls." He picked up the boat with trembling hands. It was similar to Nate's, but not identical. Newer, but carved in the same style. Zara pointed to one of the drawings on the wall. It showed the mansion from outside, with a specific window marked with an X. That's the window in the portrait room, where Eli's picture hangs. "My son has been here," Graham said, his voice breaking. "In this house, under my nose. And I never knew." Martin was already photographing everything, cataloging evidence. But Graham barely noticed. He was thinking about Eleanor, about her cold eyes and colder heart, about how she'd always resented him for inheriting the family fortune. But to do this? To torture him this way? To keep his son so close yet completely hidden? "She's going to pay," Graham said quietly. For every moment Nate spent afraid. For every night he slept in places like this. She's going to pay for all of it. Back upstairs, security was already changing locks and codes. Graham pulled Zara and Loretta aside. "I need to ask you both something," he said. "And I need you to be completely honest. Do you feel safe staying here? Because if you don't, I can arrange for you to go somewhere else. Somewhere far away until this is over." Loretta looked at her daughter. Zara looked back at her. Some wordless communication passed between them, and then Zara spoke. "I don't want to run away. I want to help find Eli. He's my friend, and he needs us. Baby, it's dangerous. I know, but leaving won't make us safer, Mama. Whoever took Eli, they already know about us. They already broke into our home." Zara looked at Graham with an intensity beyond her years. The only way to be safe is to finish this, to find him and bring him home. Graham felt something shift in his chest. This brave, brilliant child was risking everything to help save his son. A boy she'd only known for a few months, years ago, in the saddest place either of them had ever been. "Then we finish it," he said, "together. But from now on, you don't go anywhere alone. Not in this house, not outside it. Nowhere. Do you understand?" They both nodded. That night, as Zara tried to sleep again in the enormous bed, she heard the tapping one more time. She got up and pressed her hand against the wall, tapping back in the same pattern. Whatever was in the walls, whoever it was, they were trying to communicate. And Zara had a terrible, wonderful suspicion that she knew exactly who it was. Someone who remembered their code. Someone who knew she'd come back for him. Someone who was still waiting, after all these years, for someone to find him and bring him home. Martin Cole worked through the night, and by morning he had what Graham needed: concrete proof of Eleanor Westmore's estate. Satellite images showed the property sprawling across 20 acres, surrounded by 12-foot walls topped with cameras. The main house was a modern fortress disguised as a country retreat, with security checkpoints at the single entrance and guards patrolling the perimeter. "She's hiding something in there," Martin said, spreading the images across Graham's desk. "No one needs this level of security for a normal residence." Graham stared at the photos, his jaw tight. Could Nate be there? Maybe. Or maybe she's just paranoid because she knows what she's done. Martin tapped another image. But look at this. Delivery van comes every Tuesday and Friday. Same company, same time. Food delivery for a household that, according to public records, has only 3 staff members. That's a lot of groceries. Unless she's feeding more people than she's admitting to. Exactly. Graham made his decision. We go there. Today. I want to see my sister's face when I ask her what she did with my son. Graham, we should involve the police. No. Graham's voice was steel. Not yet. If we go in with authorities, she'll have lawyers there before we finish speaking. I want answers first. Then we'll bury her with every legal tool I have. While the men planned, Loretta moved Zara to a different room in the manor. The new space was smaller, but more secure, with reinforced doors and windows that didn't face any of the hidden corridors they discovered. Graham had also hired additional security, men who stood watch in the hallways at night. But Zara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She was doing homework in the sitting room when she heard it again. The tapping. 3 slow, 2 quick, 3 slow. She dropped her pencil and pressed her ear to the wall. Top, 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 top. Her heart hammered. She tapped back. 2 quick, 1 slow, 2 quick. It was her signal for "where are you?" Silence. Then, faintly more tapping. This time it sounded like it was coming from above her. From the ceiling, or maybe the floor above. Zara grabbed her phone and texted her mother, who was working 2 floors down. "I hear the tapping again. It's coming from upstairs." Loretta's response was immediate. "Stay where you are. I'm getting security." But Zara couldn't just sit still. Not when someone, maybe Eli himself, was trying to reach her. She opened the door carefully and looked up and down the hallway. Empty. She could hear security's footsteps on the floor below, coming closer. The tapping started again, more urgent now. It was definitely coming from upstairs, from somewhere in the East Wing. The Forbidden Wing. Against every instruction she'd been given, Zara ran for the stairs. She took them 2 at a time, her sneakers silent on the carpeted steps. The East Wing doors loomed ahead, their electronic locks glowing red. But one of the doors was slightly ajar, like someone had just passed through. Zara slipped inside. The hallway was different here. Colder. The portraits lining the walls were older, more formal. She passed the painting of young Nate that she'd first seen, and her breath caught. Someone had left something at the base of the frame. A fresh drawing. Pencil on paper, showing a boat on stormy water. And in the corner, the signature, an N inside a circle. "Eli," she whispered. "Where are you?" A sound behind her made her spin. It was Karina, the maid who'd warned her before. But Karina's expression had changed. Gone was the fear. Now she looked cold, calculating. "You should have stayed in your room," Karina said quietly. "You know where he is. You know where Eli is." "I know a lot of things." Karina stepped closer. "Including that you're making everything very complicated. Ms. Westmore had a plan. A good plan. And you ruined it by opening your mouth. Ms. Westmore, you work for Eleanor. I work for whoever pays me. And right now, that's her." Karina pulled out her phone. "She's going to want to know you're wandering around where you shouldn't be." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Security burst through the door, followed by Loretta and Graham. Karina's face went pale, and she tried to back away, but one of the security guards grabbed her arm. "Let me go. I haven't done anything." "You're trespassing in a restricted area," Graham said coldly. "And I think you've done quite a lot." He turned to his head of security. "Hold her. Call the police. I want her questioned about her connection to Eleanor Westmore." As they dragged Karina away, still protesting, Graham knelt beside Zara. Are you hurt? No, but look. She showed him the fresh drawing. Someone left this here. Recently. Maybe just minutes ago. Graham took the paper with shaking hands. The style was unmistakable. The same technique as all those drawings they'd found at the orphanage. And the date in the corner. Today's date. He's here, Graham whispered. My son is in this house. Right now. Martin appeared in the doorway, breathing hard from running. Graham, we have a problem. Security footage from the last hour shows someone accessing the servant corridors. A young person, thin, maybe 13 or 14. Male. The footage cuts out after 30 seconds, but he was moving toward the east wing. Where do those corridors lead? Everywhere. The whole mansion. But there's a main hub behind the portrait gallery. If he's trying to avoid being seen, that's where he'd go. They moved as a group, following Martin through a maze of hallways until they reached a section of wall that looked solid but felt hollow when Graham knocked on it. He pressed against a carved panel, and a section of wall swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Everyone stays behind me, Graham ordered. If my son is down there, I don't want him frightened. They descended slowly, Graham in the lead with a flashlight. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a junction of corridors spreading in multiple directions. The walls were lined with old pipes and electrical conduits, and the floor was covered in decades of dust, except for the footprints. Small, fresh footprints leading deeper into the darkness. Graham followed them, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The corridor twisted and turned, passing behind walls and underfloors. They found more evidence of recent habitation, a dropped wrapper, a cup of water, a pencil, and then they found the chamber. It was a small room, maybe 10 feet square, that had once been a storage space for cleaning supplies. Now it held a cot, a battery-powered lantern, and more drawings. Dozens of them, covering every surface. Boats and water, over and over, each one more detailed than the last. A backpack sat on the cot. Inside, Graham found clothes, a few books, and a wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photograph, old and creased, but carefully preserved. It showed Graham and a younger boy, maybe 7 years old, on a sailboat. Both of them were smiling, the boy's small hand gripping the wheel while Graham guided him. That's from our last trip together, Graham said, his voice breaking. The day before he disappeared. I didn't even know this photo existed. He kept it, Zara said softly. All this time, he kept your picture. A sound echoed through the corridors. Footsteps running. Someone was fleeing deeper into the maze. Wait, Graham shouted. Please, I'm not here to hurt you. But the footsteps didn't stop. Graham ran after them, leaving the others behind. He chased the sound through the twisting passages, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. He was 50, not as fast as he used to be, but desperation gave him speed. He rounded a corner and stopped. A boy stood at the end of the corridor, silhouetted against a shaft of light coming from a grate above. He was thin, dressed in dark clothes, his face in shadow. But Graham would have known that silhouette anywhere. Nate? Graham's voice was barely a whisper. The boy flinched. That's not my name anymore. Yes, it is. It always has been. You're Nathaniel Westmore. You're my son. I don't have a father. The words were bitter, rehearsed. She told me. She told me you didn't want me. That you were glad I was gone. She lied. Graham took a step forward, tears streaming down his face. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping. Every day, for 10 years, I've carried your loss like a stone in my chest. The boy's silhouette shifted. Then why didn't you find me? The question cut deeper than any knife. Graham sank to his knees on the dusty floor. Because I didn't know where to look. Because someone made me believe you were dead. Because I trusted the wrong people and failed you in the worst way a father can fail his child. His voice broke. But I'm here now, and I'm never letting you go again. Silence stretched between them. Then the boy took a step forward into the light. It was Nate. Older, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that no 13-year-old should have. But it was unmistakably him. The same dark hair, the same serious expression. the same small scar above his right eyebrow. And in his hand, he clutched a wooden sailboat. Illy. Zara's voice came from behind Graham. She'd followed them into the corridor. Is it really you? The boy's hard expression cracked. Zara, I told you someone would come. I told you he'd find you. Nate's face crumpled. He dropped to his knees, the sailboat falling from his hands. Graham closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around his son, holding him as Nate sobbed against his chest. 10 years of fear, of loneliness, of believing he was unwanted and abandoned, poured out in those tears. I'm sorry, Graham whispered over and over. I'm so sorry, but you're safe now. You're home. Behind them, Loretta helped Zara forward. The girl knelt beside Nate and took his hand, tapping their old pattern against his palm. He gripped her fingers like a lifeline. And for the first time in a decade, Nathaniel Westmore believed he might actually be safe. The reunion was cut short by the harsh reality of their situation. Nate was malnourished, dehydrated, and clearly traumatized. Graham called his personal physician, who arrived within 30 minutes and examined Nate in one of the secure guest rooms. The boy allowed it, but only if Zara stayed with him. He's physically okay, considering, the doctor told Graham quietly outside the room. But psychologically, he's been through something no child should endure. He'll need therapy time, patience. He'll have whatever he needs. While the doctor worked, Martin coordinated with local police to arrest Karina. But when officers arrived at the manor, they found the room where security had been holding her was empty. The guard posted outside was unconscious, and the window stood open. She had help, Martin said grimly. Someone else in this house helped her escape. Graham ordered a complete lockdown. Every exit sealed, every staff member accounted for. They gathered in the Great Hall, nearly 30 people, all looking nervous and confused. Graham stood before them, his face carved from stone. Someone in this household has been working against me, he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. Someone helped kidnap my son 10 years ago and has been helping keep him hidden. Someone just helped a suspect escape police custody. He let his gaze sweep across every face. I want to know who. Silence. Nervous glances. Shuffling feet. Sir, one of the older maids spoke up timidly. If you're looking for someone who's acting strange, there's one person who hasn't shown up for the lockdown. Who? Ms. Pennington, the head housekeeper. I haven't seen her since this morning. Graham's blood went cold. Ms. Pennington had been with the family for 15 years. She'd been there before Nate disappeared. She'd been there through everything. Security found Ms. Pennington's private quarters empty. Her clothes were gone, her personal items cleared out. But she'd left in a hurry because they found her tablet still charging on the nightstand. Martin accessed it immediately. The tablet was full of messages, encrypted communications with someone identified only as E. The messages detailed everything. Nate's movements through the corridors, Zara's arrival, Graham's investigation. Ms. Pennington had been feeding Eleanor information from inside the manor for years. There's a message from today, Martin said, his face darkening. Sent 20 minutes ago. It says, he has the boy. Relocating to Plan B. Prepare the extraction. Extraction? Graham felt panic seize his chest. They're coming here. They're coming for Nate. The words were barely out of his mouth when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the Great Hall in an eerie red glow. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. Graham ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He had to get to Nate. The guest room door was open. Inside, the doctor lay unconscious on the floor. Loretta sat tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. And Zara was gone. Nate was gone. Graham untied Loretta with shaking hands while Martin called for medical assistance. She ripped the gag away, gasping. They came through the wall, she said, her voice hoarse. A hidden panel opened, and 2 people in masks grabbed them. Zara fought. She tried to scream, but they were too strong. They dragged them both back into the corridors. Tears streamed down her face. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't protect them. Which direction? Graham demanded. Toward the east wing. Toward where we found Nate earlier. Graham and Martin raced into the servant corridors, following the sounds of struggle. They could hear Zara screaming in the distance, her voice echoing through the maze of passages. Graham ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, his lungs burning, his heart threatening to burst. They burst into the main chamber they'd found earlier, and Graham's world tilted. Karina stood in the center of the room, no longer pretending to be a helpless maid. She held Zara by the arm, the girl struggling against her grip, and behind her, blocking the other exit, stood Miss Pennington. But it was the figure behind them that made Graham's blood freeze. Eleanor Westmore stepped out of the shadows, impeccably dressed, her cold eyes fixed on her brother. In her hand, she held a phone. "Hello, Graham," she said calmly. "I believe you've been looking for me. Where's my son?" "Your son?" Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He stopped being your son the moment I decided he was better off without you. The moment I realized that weak, sentimental fools like you don't deserve the Westmore legacy. You faked his death. You tortured him for years. Why? Because you didn't deserve him." Eleanor's composure cracked, rage flooding her face. "Father left everything to you. The fortune, the company, the respect. Just because you were the oldest son. I was smarter, more capable, more deserving, but I got nothing. So I decided to take what mattered most to you. He's a child, an innocent child. He's a Westmore. And I raised him to understand what that really means. To be strong, not soft. To survive, not crumble." Eleanor gestured around the chamber. "He learned to adapt, to hide, to endure. I made him better than you ever could have." "You made him terrified," Zara shouted, still struggling against Karina's grip. "You made him think his father didn't want him. You're a monster. And you," Eleanor turned her cold gaze on Zara, "ruined everything by remembering him, by speaking up when you should have stayed quiet." She nodded to Karina. "Take her to the van. We're leaving." "No." Graham lunged forward, but Ms. Pennington pulled something from her jacket. A taser. The threat was clear. "You're not taking anyone anywhere," Martin said from behind Graham. "The police are already surrounding the property. You have nowhere to go." Eleanor smiled, cold and confident. "I have everywhere to go. Money buys many things, Mr. Cole, including escape routes and new identities." She turned toward the far wall, where another hidden door stood open. "Bring the girl." That's when Nate appeared. He stepped out from behind a stack of old crates, his face no longer showing fear but determination. In his hand, he held a piece of metal pipe he'd found in the corridors. "Let her go," he said, his young voice steady. "Or I start screaming, and don't stop until every police officer outside hears where we are." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Nathaniel, what are you?" "My name is Nate." He took another step forward. "And she's right. You're a monster. You told me my father abandoned me, but you're the one who took me away. You locked me in rooms and moved me from place to place and made me afraid to trust anyone." His voice grew stronger. "But I remember him. I always remembered, and I knew you were lying. I did this for you. No, you did this to hurt him, and you used me to do it." Nate looked at his father, and despite everything, despite the years and the trauma, he smiled. "But he found me, just like I knew he would." Zara made her move while everyone was distracted. She stomped on Karina's instep and twisted away, running toward Nate. The two children stood together, facing Eleanor. "It's over," Graham said quietly. "You've lost." Eleanor's composure finally shattered. She lunged toward the children, but Loretta burst into the room at that moment, having freed herself from the bonds. She tackled Eleanor to the ground with all the fury of a mother protecting her child. Ms. Pennington tried to use the taser, but Martin disarmed her with a quick strike. Karina ran for the hidden door, but security guards poured through the entrance, cutting off her escape. Within minutes, all three women were in handcuffs, being led out by police officers who'd finally breached the maze of corridors. Eleanor fought every step, screaming about lawyers and rights and injustice. But Graham didn't hear her. He was on his knees beside Nate and Zara, his arms around both of them, holding them close. "It's over," he whispered. "It's finally over." Nate buried his face in his father's shoulder. "Are you sure? Are they really gone?" "They're gone, and they're never coming back. I promise." Zara looked up at Loretta, who'd joined them on the floor. "Mama, are you okay?" "I'm okay, baby. We're all okay now." The four of them sat there in the dusty chamber, surrounded by police and security and the evidence of years of suffering, and finally allowed themselves to believe it. The nightmare was over. The truth had won, and the family that had been torn apart by cruelty and greed was beginning, against all odds, to piece itself back together. The police station was chaos. Officers moved through hallways, evidence bags piled on desks, and in 3 separate interrogation rooms. Eleanor Westmore, Ms. Pennington, and Karina sat in handcuffs, each flanked by lawyers who'd arrived faster than seemed possible. Graham stood behind the one-way glass, watching his sister. She sat with perfect posture, her face a mask of cold indifference, as if being arrested for kidnapping and conspiracy was merely an inconvenience. Detective Sarah Morrison stood beside him, her arms crossed. "She's not talking. Neither are the other two. They all lawyered up the moment they were read their rights." "They'll talk eventually," Graham said quietly. "The evidence is overwhelming." "Maybe, but rich people with expensive lawyers have a way of making evidence disappear." Morrison looked at him. "I need you to understand something, Mr. Westmore. This case is going to be a circus. Media attention, public scrutiny, every detail of your family's life dissected in court. Are you prepared for that?" Graham thought about Nate, currently at the hospital undergoing a full medical evaluation. He thought about the boy's hollow eyes, the way he'd flinched when the doctor first approached, the tremor in his voice when he'd asked if Graham was really going to keep him this time. "I'm prepared for anything if it means my son gets justice." Morrison nodded. "Then let's build a case that sticks." In the hospital across town, Nate sat on an examination table while doctors checked his vitals. Zara sat in a chair nearby, refusing to leave despite her mother's gentle suggestions that she should rest. Loretta stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, still processing everything that had happened. "Your heart rate is elevated," the doctor said to Nate, "but that's to be expected given the stress. Physically, you're undernourished and showing signs of prolonged anxiety, but nothing that can't be addressed with proper care." "What about mentally?" Graham asked from the doorway. He'd arrived moments earlier, still wearing the same clothes from the confrontation, dust from the corridors still clinging to his shoes. The doctor hesitated. "Ide recomen immediata psychological evaluation." What Nate has experienced constitutes severe trauma. He's going to need professional help to process it. Then he'll have the best therapist money can buy. "Dad," Nate said softly. The words sounded foreign on his tongue, like he was testing it out after years of not being allowed to say it. "Can we just go home? I don't want more doctors right now. I just want to go home." Graham's throat tightened. "Of course. Whatever you need." They discharged Nate with instructions for follow-up appointments and a prescription for anxiety medication. As they walked through the hospital parking lot toward Graham's car, Nate suddenly stopped. "What if she comes back?" he asked, his voice small. "What if she gets out and takes me again?" Graham knelt in front of his son, taking both his hands. "Look at me. She's in jail. She's going to stay in jail. And even if every wall in the world came down, I would never let her near you again. Do you understand? I failed you once. I will never fail you again." Nate's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't fail me. I know that now. She lied about everything. She told me you were the one who wanted me gone, that you paid her to take me away because I was too much trouble." His voice broke. "She said you were glad when they told you I died." The words cut through Graham like shattered glass. He pulled Nate into his arms, holding him tight while the boy sobbed. "I mourned you every single day. Your room is exactly as you left it. I couldn't bear to change anything because changing it meant accepting you were really gone." He pulled back to look at his son's face. "You were never trouble. You were my whole world." Zara and Loretta watched from a respectful distance, both of them crying. Finally, Loretta approached and placed a gentle hand on Graham's shoulder. "We should get these children home," she said softly. "They need rest. And food. Real food, not hospital vending machine snacks." Graham nodded, wiping his eyes. They drove back to the manor in silence, Nate sitting between Graham and Zara in the back seat, still clutching the wooden sailboat he'd carried for years. The media had already descended on the estate by the time they arrived. News vans lined the street outside the gates, cameras trained on the entrance, reporters shouting questions. Graham's security kept them at bay, but their voices still carried on the wind. "Mr. Westmore, is it true your son was alive all these years? Was your sister involved in the kidnapping? How does it feel to have Nathaniel home?" Graham ignored them all, ushering Nate quickly inside. But once they were through the door, Nate froze. He stood in the grand entrance hall, staring up at the chandelier, at the sweeping staircase, at the marble floors that gleamed under soft lighting. "I remember this," he whispered. "I used to slide down the banister when you weren't looking." "You did." Graham smiled despite his tears. "You gave your mother a heart attack every time." Nate's face crumpled at the mention of his mother. "She died while I was gone, didn't she? Eleanor told me. She said Mom died because I disappeared, that it was my fault." "No." Graham's voice was firm. "Your mother got sick. Cancer. It had nothing to do with you. She fought for 3 years, and the whole time she believed you were gone. She held on a hope that somehow she was wrong, that somehow you come back." He took Nate's face in his hands. "She loved you more than life itself. Never doubt that." They settled in the main living room, where the staff had prepared food and hot tea. Nate ate hesitantly at first, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed, but with Zara beside him encouraging every bite, he slowly relaxed. Martin arrived an hour later with updates from the police. They're charging all 3 of them. Eleanor's facing kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other counts. Miss Pennington and Karina are cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences. "What are they saying?" Graham asked. "That Eleanor orchestrated everything. She planned Nate's disappearance for months before the boating accident. She had people on her payroll at the marina, including the woman with the birthmark, whose real name is Jennifer Hayes. Hayes helped stage the accident, making it look like Nate fell overboard. But really, they'd already taken him earlier that morning." Nate spoke up quietly from the couch. "They gave me something, medicine that made me sleepy. When I woke up, I was in a car driving away from the water. Jennifer told me Dad said I had to go away for a while, that he needed me to be brave." Graham's hands clenched into fists. Martin continued. "Eleanor moved him between safe houses, orphanages, and private facilities for years. She used fake names, forged documents, and paid off anyone who asked questions. Her plan was to keep him hidden until Graham either gave up the company to her, or until she could claim he was mentally unfit to run the family business due to grief. But I never gave up looking," Graham said. "No, you didn't," which made her desperate. When Nate got older and started resisting, started trying to run away, she had to move him more frequently. That's why he ended up in Riverside. And then Zara recognized him, Loretta said, holding her daughter close. And then everything unraveled. Martin looked at Nate. "You were very brave, keeping that photograph and those drawings. They're evidence now. They prove you never forgot your real identity." Nate leaned against Zara. "I try to forget sometimes, when it hurt too much to remember. But Zara helped me. She told me stories about her dad, before he died, about how love doesn't disappear just because someone's not there." He looked at Graham. "I kept believing you loved me, even when Eleanor said you didn't." Graham had to leave the room. He stood in the hallway with his hand pressed against the wall, trying to breathe through the rage and grief and overwhelming love that threatened to consume him. Loretta found him there a few minutes later. "He's going to be okay," she said gently. "It'll take time, but he's strong. Stronger than Eleanor ever gave him credit for." "I want her to suffer," Graham said, his voice raw. "I want her to feel every ounce of pain she put him through. She will. Prison will be its own kind of suffering for a woman like her." Loretta paused. "But what Nate needs now isn't revenge. It's healing. He needs to know he's safe, loved, and that his life can be normal again." Graham nodded, wiping his eyes. "You're right. You're always right. Not always. But I've learned a thing or two about healing." She smiled sadly. "After Zara's father died, I thought we'd never be okay again. But children are resilient. If you give them love and stability, they can overcome almost anything." They returned to the living room, where Zara had convinced Nate to watch a movie. Something light and funny, Nothing too intense. The boy laughed at a joke on screen, and the sound was like music Graham hadn't heard in 10 years. 3 months later, Eleanor Westmore stood trial in a courtroom packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and victims of other crimes who wanted to see justice served against someone wealthy enough to think they were above the law. Graham sat in the front row, Martin on one side, Loretta on the other. Nate and Zara were not in attendance. Their therapist had advised against exposing them to the proceedings. Instead, they were at the manor with a tutor, catching up on years of missed education. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The transportation logs, the forged documents, testimony from orphanage workers who'd been paid to look the other way, and recordings of Eleanor's own voice giving instructions about moving the package between facilities. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she showed no remorse. "I did what I thought was necessary," she said coldly. "Graham was weak. He would have raised that boy to be just as weak. I was making him stronger. By locking him in rooms?" the prosecutor asked. "By moving him from place to place, never letting him have stability or security? By teaching him that the world is hard and only the strong survive." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Eleanor guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison without possibility of parole. Ms. Pennington received 15 years, and Karina got 10. As they led Eleanor out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked at Graham one last time. He saw no remorse in her eyes, no recognition of the harm she'd caused, just cold calculation, probably already planning appeals and loopholes. But Graham felt only relief. She couldn't hurt Nate anymore. That chapter was finally, truly closed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Graham had prepared a statement with his lawyers, but when the microphones appeared, he spoke from the heart instead. 10 years ago, my son was taken from me. For 10 years, I believed he was dead. But a brave 12-year-old girl had the courage to speak up when she recognized him. And because of her, my son is home. He looked directly into the cameras. Zara Davis didn't have to say anything. It would have been easier to stay quiet. But she chose truth over silence. And that choice saved my son's life. She's the real hero of this story. The footage aired on every news channel. Within days, Zara's face was everywhere. People called her a hero, an inspiration, proof that one voice could make a difference. Loretta worried about the attention, but Zara handled it with the same quiet strength she'd shown from the beginning. When reporters called asking for interviews, she politely declined. When the school wanted to honor her at an assembly, she agreed only if they promised not to make a big fuss. "I just want things to be normal," she told her mother. "I want to go to school and hang out with Nate and not be on TV anymore." Gradually, the media attention faded. Other stories took precedence, and the Westmore family saga became yesterday's news, which was exactly what they needed to begin truly healing. Graham converted one of the manor's sitting rooms into a therapy space where both Nate and Zara met with Dr. Patricia Reeves twice a week, sometimes together, sometimes separately. The doctor helped Nate process his trauma, taught him coping mechanisms for his anxiety, and slowly, carefully, helped him rebuild his sense of self-worth. The nightmares didn't stop immediately. Some nights, Nate would wake up screaming about cold water and locked doors. Graham would rush to his room and hold him until the terror passed, reminding him over and over that he was safe, that he was home, that no one would ever take him away again. But the nightmares grew less frequent, and between them, there were good moments. Great moments, even like the day Nate asked if he could go sailing with his father. They went to a lake an hour from the city, just the two of them. Graham rented a small sailboat, nothing fancy, and they spent the afternoon on the water. Nate was nervous at first, his hands shaking when he touched the rigging. But Graham was patient, talking him through every step, letting him take control at his own pace. By the end of the day, Nate was smiling, really smiling, not the careful, guarded expression he usually wore. "I thought I'd be scared," he said as they packed up. "But I wasn't, because you were there." Graham pulled his son into a hug. "I'll always be there. From now on, I'll always be there." Loretta officially accepted Graham's offer of a position managing the household staff, with a salary that made her gasp when she saw the contract. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about stability, security, and the knowledge that Zara would grow up with opportunities Loretta had never dreamed of. "I need you to understand something," Graham told her during their first official meeting. "You're not just an employee. You and Zara, your family. You brought my son back to me. I can never repay that debt. You don't owe me anything. We did what was right, and that's exactly why you belong here." Nate and Zara became inseparable. They did homework together in the library, explored the manor grounds, and spent hours in the art studio Graham had set up for them. Nate still drew boats obsessively, but now they were happy boats, sailing toward bright horizons instead of drowning in dark water. 6 months after the trial, Graham commissioned a new portrait. The artist came to the manor and spent weeks sketching, painting, perfecting every detail. When it was finally finished, Graham gathered everyone in the portrait gallery for the unveiling. The painting showed Nate and Zara standing together on a dock, the same wooden sailboat held between them. Nate looked older than in his childhood portrait, stronger, more confident. Zara stood beside him with her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling at something beyond the frame. Behind them, the water stretched into the distance, but it wasn't dark or threatening. It was bright, reflecting sunlight, full of possibility. At the bottom of the frame, a brass plaque read, "The children who found each other." "It's perfect," Nate whispered. They hung it in the main hall, right where everyone could see it. Not hidden in a study or tucked away in a forgotten wing, but proudly displayed as a testament to survival, friendship, and the family they'd become. That evening, Graham, Loretta, Nate, and Zara had dinner together in the smaller dining room, the one with windows overlooking the garden. It wasn't formal or stuffy. They ate pasta and laughed at Zara's stories from school and made plans for the weekend. At one point, Nate looked around the table and said, "Is this what normal families do?" "I think so," Graham said, smiling. "Though I'm not sure there's any such thing as normal." "I like this kind of normal," Nate decided. Zara raised her glass of juice. "To our weird, not normal family." They all clinked glasses, even Loretta, who'd been reluctant at first to accept her place at this table. But Graham had insisted, and she'd learned that sometimes family wasn't about blood or status. It was about the people who showed up for you when everything fell apart. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, Graham stood in the portrait gallery looking at both paintings, the sad little boy he'd lost and the brave young man he'd found again. Loretta joined him, 2 cups of tea in her hands. She offered him one. "You did good," she said simply. "We did good," he corrected. "All of us." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their tea, watching the moonlight stream through the windows. Outside, they could hear security making their rounds, keeping watch. But inside, finally everyone could rest. The nightmare was over. The truth had been told. Justice had been served. And a family, torn apart by greed and cruelty, had been rebuilt through courage, truth, and love. Nate was home, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. He was healing, growing, learning to trust again. He still carried scars, visible and invisible, but he was no longer that terrified boy hiding in walls and drawing desperate pictures of rescue. He was Nathaniel Westmore. He was Nate. He was someone's son, someone's friend, someone who mattered. And he was finally, truly home. In his room that night, Nate placed the old wooden sailboat on his nightstand, right where he could see it. It had carried him through the worst years of his life, a tiny piece of his father's love that Eleanor could never take away. Tomorrow, his dad had promised to teach him how to make a new one. They'd work on it together in the workshop, father and son, building something with their own hands. But tonight, the old boat was enough. It was a reminder of everything he'd survived and everything he'd found again. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, Nathaniel Westmore fell asleep without fear, because he knew when he woke up, his father would still be there, and he would never be alone again. If someone you loved vanished, and everyone told you they were gone forever, would you have the strength to keep believing, or would you bury the hope to survive the pain? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of courage, truth, and the families we fight to protect.